Why do my photos feel so boring? I mean, you know the feeling, right? You travel to this great location, you build your composition with frames, leading lines, negative space, and so on. And your photos look technically correct, but they just don't feel like what you felt when you took the photo. And that happens to me as well. But for the longest time, I thought that maybe with a new lens, I could make my photos feel different. But over the last 6 years as a photographer, I've learned that the problem isn't your gear and it's not even your location. Most of the time, it's just that you're missing 6 important steps that you need to take to give your photos a feeling. So in this video, I'm going to show you what these steps are and how you can apply them to take photos that feel like something. So the most important thing you can do to give your photos a certain feeling is to learn visual language. Because visual language is what determines how your photos are going to feel. But the issue is that most of the photography advice online is focused on giving you composition hacks or lessons on light that help you make your photos look amazing. But barely anyone talks about how to use composition or visual language to make your photos feel the way you want them to. So to make this less abstract, things like contrast, color, negative space, and so on are part of visual language. Let's call them visual patterns. And all of these patterns give your photos different meanings. And depending on how you combine them, the meaning and the feeling of your photo changes. So in this photo, for example, I used tonal contrast, color, and negative space to create a feeling of isolation. The tonal contrast, so the contrast between light and dark portions of the image, makes this image feel very intense and threatening. You almost can see the details in the shadows, which underlines this feeling of isolation and uncertainty. So the blue tones in this photo could stand for calmness or also for isolation. But in combination with this high contrast and this feeling of uncertainty, the blue color makes this image feel more isolated. And lastly, the negative space, so all of this empty area, emphasizes the feeling of loneliness simply because there's so much space, but only a single person in the frame. But then we also have this shot, which feels like the opposite, so let's dissect it. The warm colors, so the oranges and yellows, make this photo feel more comforting. That's just what these colors stand for, at least in a European and North American setting. And the bird in the sky creates a feeling of freedom for me. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of people connect the idea of flying with freedom. But what emphasizes this feeling of freedom is the negative space around the bird. So there's just a lot of room that gives this bird a lot of freedom. The bottom area of this photo, on the other hand, is a different story. It has a lot of tonal contrast, and that makes it feel very crammed together and less free, which is a strong contrast to the bird and its feeling of freedom. So overall, this photo communicates the battle between nature that feels very free and the industry that feels like it's taking up more and more space. Okay, there's obviously more visual patterns than I just covered, but for the sake of not making this video an hour long, let's just leave it at that. If you want a deeper dive into this kind of thing, I've got an entire guide devoted to that you can check out via the link in the description. But the thing is, understanding how these visual patterns impact the feeling of your photo is no use if you don't know what kind of feeling you want to express in your photos. Which is why tip number 2 is to think about the feeling you want to create. So as street and travel photographers, we're naturally inclined to telling stories with our photos. And this tip is going to help you take photos that not only tell a story, but also give your viewer a feeling for what it's like to experience the location that you visited, even if that's just your own hometown. So the easiest way to take photos beyond the epic landmarks that capture what it feels like visiting your location is to write down 4 to 5 themes that come to mind when you think about your location. This way, you allow yourself to focus on the story that you're trying to tell of your place instead of feeling lost with the endless potential photos that you could take. 2 weeks ago, for example, I visited Wismar, a small town in northern Germany that is famous for its historic old town and its harbor. I researched some inspiration for the city and noted themes like old town, historic architecture, narrow alleys, and a slow-paced life. So in my photos, I decided to only include a single person or no people at all to capture the feeling of a slow-paced life in a smaller town. This shot is a good example for that. The lady in the foreground is just enjoying some ice cream while shopping for some flowers that you can see in the background. So including different elements in the foreground and the background of your photo also helps give your viewer context and make your photos feel a certain way. And this is definitely not a shot that you only can get in Visma, but the point is not to take photos that you could only find in your specific location. The point of taking photos that feel a certain way is to capture the feeling of a moment as you've experienced it. But taking photos with a feeling isn't just about foreground and background. There are lots of different visual cues that can give your photos different feelings, like scale, for example. The trees in this shot are by no means tiny, but compared to the church, they give you a feeling for how big this church in the background really is. Or you could use conceptual contrast. In this case, the modern buildings create an interesting contrast with the historic tower. So this makes me feel like the history is a part of this town and that you can actually experience the history of this town when you visit. So by taking photos that express certain feelings, your photos will not only show the hype moments of your travels, but also the real stories that you experienced. But understanding how you can make your photos feel a certain way is only one half. You also need ideas on how to express your thoughts and feelings in your photos. And that is where my next tip comes in. Find the right kind of inspiration. This is going to help you whenever you feel stuck and everything looks boring to you. But the issue with finding inspiration is that there's a trap that a lot of us fall into. And I definitely have before. And that trap is to look for inspiration in the photos of our favorite photographers who live in these amazing places like New York, London, or Tokyo when you're not living in these places. Because the thing is, most of us are not. So it's almost impossible to recreate the look or the feeling of these inspiring photos in your location. So the fix for that is pretty simple. Instead of looking for inspiration from photos of these amazing locations, look for inspiration from photos that are from your location. If you live in a small town, for example, you can look for small town photography, because chances are that you're going to find common themes and compositions that you can recreate in your own location. Or if you want to go the extra mile, look for inspiring themes instead of locations. And then use the tips I mentioned before to recreate a certain feeling that you connect with your theme. Okay, once you've gathered your inspiration, the next best thing you can do is start a photography project. It doesn't even have to be a huge project, just try taking photos that fit a certain theme. This could be, for example, documenting the feeling of summer in your hometown. And if you're wondering, how does a photo project help you take photos that create a certain feeling, just think about it. Taking photos that feel like something is one of the hardest things you can do. And to learn that, you need to practice. And you need a lot of time. So note some ideas that feel like summer to you, for example. This could be eating ice cream or cooling down in the water or anything else, and then go out and take photos that capture that feeling. But there's also an overlooked advantage of photography projects that nobody talks about, because they help you keep your joy for photography alive. Because the issue a lot of photographers have, and I certainly do, is that we see great photos every single day. Just have to open up Instagram, Pinterest or YouTube and someone will show you their amazing photos. And that makes it seem like everybody's taking amazing photos every day. So you create this expectation that you have to take amazing photos every day as well. And if you don't, it feels like you wasted your precious free time. But the reality is that nobody takes amazing photos every single day. And you probably know that already. But the good thing about photography projects is that they allow you to really internalize that. because they give you a long-term perspective. They usually take weeks or months to complete, and this way, if one day you don't get any good shots, you'll feel much more relaxed because you don't have this self-imposed deadline of having to take great photos by the end of the day. And I learned this firsthand while building this YouTube channel. I've talked about shooting in different conditions, using different techniques, and so on. So focusing on different themes for each video gave me a reason to go out and take photos, and it made me realize that it's just impossible to go out once a week and take photos that I feel are amazing. So photo projects are a good way to find motivation to go out and shoot, but there's a big mistake that you need to avoid here. And that is probably the biggest mistake every photographer makes, myself included. And that is to confuse inspiration with motivation. So if you ever feel like you don't want to go out and take photos because you're not inspired or you have no idea what to shoot, this next tip is going to help you with that. The issue with relying on inspiration is that inspiration is always extrinsic, so it always has to come from outside yourself. And it feels like it's so easy to find that inspiration on Instagram, Pinterest, or YouTube. But the issue is sometimes the content you see online just won't inspire you. And if you can't take photos without being inspired first, you'll always be dependent on someone else's content. But the thing is, the issue is not inspiration itself. The issue is that you're confusing inspiration with motivation. So if you shift your mindset from I need to be inspired to go out to take photos to I need to be motivated to go out and take photos, you'll notice that motivation can come from within you, because for motivation you just need a reason. And the reason to go out could just be to balance out your stressful job, or to exercise a creative hobby, or just to make something instead of consuming content all the time. And I take photos for all of these reasons, so I'm no different from you. The thing is just, whatever your motivation is, it has to be for yourself and not for others. This way you're creating intrinsic motivation that comes from within you because you want to take photos and not because someone made you want to take photos. But I also realize that it's hard to find that motivation for photography when you have no idea what to shoot. So this is where my final tip comes in. And this will help you find interesting things to take photos of, even if you feel uninspired or if you think you live in a boring location. And the trick is to understand what your anchors are. So anchors are things that make you think, wait a minute, this looks so interesting, I should take a photo of that. That can be how the light fell on a super mundane subject, for example. Because sometimes that is just enough to make something look interesting. Or it's about a color that sparked your attention. Or you found an unusual perspective on a mundane everyday scene. The great thing about anchors is that they are things that always pique your interest. And of course, I can't tell you what to find interesting, but I made an entire video that will help you finding anchors. So watch this video right here or here to find interesting things to photograph wherever you are.